It began as a night she'd been waiting for. Not just any night, their night. 8 years since the vows. 8 years since she stood in that little church on the edge of town and promised forever. And tonight, she wanted to believe that forever still meant something. The house was warm with the scent of garlic and rosemary. Butter hissed in the pan as the wagyu browned, its edges turning crisp and golden. The air shimmered faintly with the heat, soft light catching the sheen on her wedding band as she stirred the sauce one last time. Everything was perfect, or at least, it looked that way. On the table, 2 glasses of red wine caught the glow of the candles. The tablecloth, ivory, freshly pressed, was smooth beneath her fingers. She'd spent hours preparing this dinner, the kind of care you give to something fragile, something you're trying to hold together before it breaks. From the record player came the slow hum of jazz, a tune they used to dance to when life still felt light. Back then, their world was small, a 1-bedroom apartment, peeling paint, and too much laughter for the space they had. He used to call her Izzy and tuck notes into her coat pocket before work. Little things, sweet things, things that made her believe she'd chosen right. She smiled faintly at the memory, at the sound of his voice echoing somewhere deep in her mind. "Don't ever stop making dinner like this," he'd once said, a grin in his voice. "It smells like home." The thought softened her. She adjusted the candles, checked the roast again, and glanced at the clock. 7:15. He said he'd be home by 7. She told herself it was fine. Traffic, maybe. A late meeting. She poured another small splash of wine into her glass, just to feel the comfort of holding it. Outside, the evening settled slowly over Denver. Street lamps blinked awake one by one, casting long shadows across the quiet cul-de-sac. A faint wind brushed against the balcony lights she'd strung earlier, golden orbs swaying softly, reflections dancing against the window. She walked to the mirror in the hallway, fixed her hair, pressed her lips together. The perfume lingered, the same one he'd given her on their 2nd anniversary. He said it reminded him of summer mornings after the rain. She wore it tonight for him, but as she looked at herself, something in her chest tugged. It wasn't fear, not yet, just that strange stillness that happens when a moment starts to stretch too long. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every tiny sound. The faint tick of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the flicker of the candle flame fighting against the air. She laughed softly, as if to shake it off. He'll walk through that door any minute. That's what she told herself. Over and over. 7:40. She checked her phone. No message, no missed call. She sent a quick text. "Everything's ready." Don't be long, her reflection in the glass of her phone looked tired. Hopeful, but tired. She returned to the kitchen, turned off the stove, and set the plates on the table. Steam rose briefly from the meat before fading into the cool air. The room smelled like comfort, the kind of smell that makes you forget what's missing. She sat down. The candlelight swayed gently between the 2 glasses, one half empty, the other untouched. Minutes passed. The clock's ticking grew louder, crueler. She stood again, unable to sit still. Walked to the window, looked down the street. Every car that passed made her pulse jump, but none of them slowed near the house. 8:05. The wine in her glass was warmer now. The food had gone still. She tried to keep her mind steady. Maybe he stopped to pick up flowers. Maybe he's planning something. But deep down, a small voice whispered what she didn't want to hear, that he wasn't coming. She pressed her palm against her stomach, breathing slow. She remembered their 3rd anniversary, how he'd surprised her with a weekend trip to Estes Park, how he'd laughed when she spilled wine on the bedsheet and swore it was bad luck. He'd kissed her then, said luck didn't matter when love was sure. She wanted that version of him to walk through the door now. That version who made promises and meant them. 8:30. She called his number. It rang once, twice, then voicemail. She tried again, straight to voicemail. Her breath caught somewhere between confusion and dread. She looked around the room, the dinner she'd made, the table she'd set, the small celebration she'd built with her hands, and realized how empty it all suddenly felt. There's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful, the kind that presses against your chest until even your heartbeat sounds too loud. That's the silence that settled over Isabella's house that night. She sat back down, hands trembling slightly, and whispered, "Maybe something came up." But even as she said it, her voice broke on the word, maybe. By the time the clock struck 9, the candle wicks had curled into themselves, the wax pooling across the table. The air had cooled, the music had stopped, and in that stillness, surrounded by the remains of what should have been a perfect anniversary, Isabella felt the first crack in a truth she wasn't ready to face. Because sometimes, the moment before everything changes doesn't feel like thunder or chaos. It feels like quiet. The kind of quiet that leaves no trace, except the sound of your own heart asking why. Welcome back to another episode of Revenge Takes HQ, where every story cuts deep and every ending hits harder for more power. And emotional stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get in today's tale. By 10:30, the candles had burned themselves down to wax puddles, and the warmth in the room had vanished with them. The food was cold, the music had stopped, and Isabella's hands wouldn't stop trembling. She checked her phone again. No message, no missed call. Just the same empty screen staring back at her like an accusation. She told herself to wait a little longer. Love, she thought, deserved patience. So she poured another glass of wine and tried to pretend it still tasted the same. It didn't. It was sharper now, heavier, almost metallic. By 11, she was pacing the living room barefoot. The balcony door was open, letting in a thin stream of night air that brushed against her skin. Outside, the fairy lights she'd hung earlier flickered weakly, their glow dimming with every gust of wind. She stood there, arms wrapped around herself, scanning the street. Each car that passed carried a flicker of hope she couldn't help but reach for. But none of them stopped. She called again. Straight to voicemail, called again. Nothing. The sound of the clock echoed through the house. Tick, tick, tick. Until it started to feel like a countdown to something she didn't understand. By midnight, she could no longer sit still. The worry had turned into something else. Not panic, not quite. Just that steady, gnawing ache that comes when you know something isn't right, but don't yet have the courage to name it. She slipped on her coat, grabbed her phone, and stepped into the night. The cold hit her like a warning. The street was silent, the kind of silence that makes even your footsteps sound too loud. Her first stop was the hospital. The receptionist gave her a practiced smile, the kind people wear when they've answered the same question 1,000 times. "No, ma'am. No accident matching that name tonight." Next, she called his friends, the ones he swore he'd known forever. "Maybe he needed space," one of them said, half asleep, half bored. "You know how guys are." She hung up before he could finish. Because she did know, and that was the problem. The car wasn't in the driveway, his wallet and keys were gone, but his toothbrush was still in the holder, his shoes by the door. His wedding band, the one he never took off, sat on the dresser beside an open drawer. She stood there, staring at it. It was the kind of sight that split you in two, half wanting to cry, half refusing to give him that satisfaction. Her reflection in the mirror caught her off guard. The woman staring back didn't look frightened. She looked focused. Tired, yes, but aware now, like the fog had lifted. She went through his things methodically. The wardrobe, the desk drawer, the nightstand. The scent of his cologne lingered faintly, that mix of cedar and something chemical. Every drawer told the same story: order, routine, absence. Until she reached the bottom of the dresser and found the envelope. It wasn't addressed to her, just initials she didn't recognize. Inside were bank withdrawal slips, large amounts, all dated within the past month. Her fingers tightened around the paper, her pulse quickening. Her phone buzzed suddenly, a message from an unknown number. "Stop calling, he's gone." The room seemed to close in on her. She called the number immediately, disconnected. The rest of the night blurred into motion. She reported him missing, answered questions she couldn't believe she was being asked. The officer's pen scratched quietly across the notepad. When was the last time you saw him? Did you argue? Any reason he might leave? She told them no. But deep down, a thought she'd been pushing aside began to form shape. The kind of thought that feels like betrayal just for thinking it. They said men sometimes need space, but no one leaves without a toothbrush. By dawn, her house looked like a memory she no longer belonged in. Half lit, half empty, carrying the scent of a meal no one ate. Then came the call. The officer's voice on the other end was steady, almost careful. Mrs. Green? We found something, a pause. His car. Abandoned near the river, for a moment, Isabella couldn't breathe. The words didn't land all at once. They settled slowly, like dust after an explosion. Outside her window, the first light of morning broke through the fog. It should have felt like relief. It didn't. It felt like the start of something she hadn't asked for, a story she was about to finish her own way. Because love had left her waiting. But what came next would make her unforgettable. The official report called it a disappearance. No forced entry, no witnesses, no struggle. Just a car abandoned near the riverbank and a husband who vanished into thin air. By the time Isabella sat in the small interview room, the coffee in her hand had gone cold. The walls were lined with photographs, lost faces, unclosed stories. She was now one of them, the worried wife, the one with trembling hands and questions that had no answers. Detective Harris walked in with the kind of calm that came from years of seeing people at their breaking point. He was polite, professional, and a little too steady for her liking. His pen tapped lightly against the folder in front of him as he spoke. "When was the last time you saw your husband, Mrs. Green?" "Yesterday morning," she answered. "He left for work. Said he'd be home by 7. And he didn't mention travel plans? Anyone he might have been meeting?" She shook her head. "Nothing unusual." He scribbled something down, nodded, then leaned back. "Sometimes people just need to get away," he said softly. "Stress, money, another life, maybe the words lingered. Another life." She didn't respond, just stared at the folder on his desk, a blank name tag that now carried her entire marriage inside it. When she left the station, the world outside felt quieter than usual. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low, heavy, uncertain. That night, the house didn't feel like hers anymore. Every object seemed to hold its breath. His coat still hung on the rack. His mug sat on the counter. His scent, faint but present, clung to the air like a memory that refused to leave. She wandered through the rooms with her phone light, as if looking for proof that he had ever really existed. She opened the drawer where he kept receipts and documents. Tidy, precise, everything in its place. But one folder caught her attention. It was newer, out of place. Inside were withdrawal slips, large amounts, made over the past few weeks. 5,000 here, 2,000 there. Different branches. Same account. Her breath caught. She flipped through them, the paper cutting faint lines across her fingers. He hadn't mentioned any of this. She sat at the edge of the bed, the folder open beside her, the sound of the rain starting again against the window. Her mind turned over every possibility: debt, gambling, something secret he was hiding to surprise her with. But even that hope felt thin now. She picked up his phone from the nightstand, scrolled through messages. Nothing unusual, at least not anymore. The call logs were clean. Too clean. The last few days had been wiped. She remembered the detective's words. Another life, maybe. Something inside her shifted then. Something small but irreversible. The woman who waited on the balcony had vanished too. What was left in her place was quieter, sharper. She wasn't searching for answers anymore. She was collecting evidence. Hours passed. The house hummed with the soft tick of the clock. She opened drawers, checked files, lifted loose floorboards in the closet. Every discovery added weight to her growing certainty that this wasn't an accident. It was a plan. Then, just after 2 in the morning, she found it. The bottom drawer of his desk, the one that always stuck, finally gave way. Beneath old bills and a few faded photographs was something wrapped in a plain white handkerchief. She unrolled it carefully. A phone. Not his. Not the one she knew. Her pulse slowed, not sped up. She turned it over in her hand, studying it like a stranger. The screen was dark, smudged with fingerprints. She pressed the power button. A lock screen, no password. Just a message banner at the top. Can't wait for you to be free. Midnight flight confirmed. She didn't blink. Didn't move. The glow of the screen reflected in her eyes, steady, unflinching. The clock struck 2:10. Somewhere outside, a car passed by, its headlights washing briefly across the window. The house felt smaller now, every wall closing in, every object complicit. She put the phone down gently beside the folder of bank slips and stared at both, money and messages, like puzzle pieces of a life she'd never been meant to see. The woman who started this night with dinner and wine had been waiting for her husband. The woman sitting here now was waiting for something else, and whatever came next, she wouldn't be calling the police. Because the moment Isabella found that second phone, she stopped being the victim. She became the story. When the screen came to life, so did the truth. The phone was clean on the surface. New messages, recent numbers, nothing old enough to trace. But one thread stood out. A name she didn't recognize. Clara. The conversation was short, ordinary at first. Quick check-ins, a string of hearts, words that looked harmless if you didn't know how to read them. But Isabella did. The pattern was familiar. The way he used to text her when they were still learning each other's language. Short sentences, always signed with a period. Not too much emotion, just enough to feel sincere. He hadn't changed his rhythm, only his audience. She scrolled slowly, each message another small cut she didn't bother to flinch from. Miss you already. Did you tell her? Soon, I promise. Then the photos. A table at a restaurant she'd never been to. The same one he once told her was too expensive. A hotel room with curtains drawn tight. A reflection in the mirror. His watch, unmistakable. The one she bought him for their 5th anniversary. She stared at the images until her eyes blurred. Not from tears, but from exhaustion. The kind that comes when every doubt you ever buried starts clawing its way back up. I'd never hurt you. You know I'd never lie. It's just work, Izzy. Don't overthink it. The memories began to unwind. Flashes, quick and sharp. The times he came home late and kissed her forehead instead of her lips. The phone he'd turn face down whenever it buzzed. The weekend trip he canceled last minute because the project was delayed. Each scene flickered like old film, warm tones at first, then colder with every reel. She saw the cracks now, how long they'd been there, how carefully she'd painted over them with forgiveness. There's a point when grief changes temperature. It stops burning and starts freezing. That's where Isabella stood now. Not broken, just cold enough to think clearly. She sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through messages that had nothing to do with her, but somehow carried her name between the lines. She'll understand once I'm gone. You deserve better than her. Tonight. Her thumb hovered over the last message, a timestamp blinking at the bottom. Sent the same night he vanished. The words were simple. He promised me he'd leave you tonight. The room fell silent. The only sound was her breath. Slow, deliberate. The heartbeat faded. She read the message again. And again. Until the words stopped feeling like betrayal and started sounding like instructions. She picked up the phone, turned it over in her hand, and smiled faintly. The kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Some promises break by accident. Others are meant to. And sometimes the person left behind isn't waiting for closure. They're planning what comes next. That was the moment Isabella stopped wondering why he left. She started deciding how he'd be found. By morning, Isabella knew what she had to do. There was no hesitation left in her. The fear had drained out sometime between midnight and dawn, leaving something cleaner, Purpose. She dressed simply, black coat, hair tied back, a look that didn't invite conversation. The phone she'd found sat in her pocket, screen locked, but buzzing faintly from missed calls she hadn't returned. She followed the address from one of the earlier messages, a townhouse on the east side of the city. The place looked ordinary, too ordinary, like the kind of house people build when they're trying to seem stable. The curtains were drawn, the porch light off. She knocked once, then again. The door opened halfway. Clara, younger, tired. Not the villain Isabella had imagined, not even close. She had the same wary eyes Isabella had seen in her own reflection the night before. Someone who's been promised something and handed nothing instead. There was a moment of silence between them, that strange recognition that happens when two strangers realize they've lived through the same lie. "You must be Isabella," Clara said softly. No anger, no surprise, just quiet resignation. Inside, the air smelled of stale perfume and sleepless nights. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, the same kind Isabella had poured the night he disappeared. "I thought you'd already left with him," Isabella said. Clara laughed once, not with humor, but disbelief. "He told me you knew. That you didn't care anymore. He said you were happy for him." The words landed like a bruise. Isabella didn't flinch. She just looked around the room, the scattered clothes, the open suitcase on the couch. "He'd been here, recently. He said he was coming back that night," Clara continued. "He told me we'd fly out together. He even sent me the flight number." Isabella took out the phone, scrolled, and showed her the last message. Clara's face drained of color. Same time, same promise. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The truth sat between them, heavy, undeniable. They weren't enemies. They were the collateral. "I waited," Clara whispered. "I thought something happened to him." "Something did," Isabella said, her tone even, her eyes fixed on the table. "He ran," Clara blinked. "From what?" Isabella didn't answer right away. She walked to the counter, noticing an envelope among the clutter. Her name on the corner, not written, printed. A bank statement, joint account. She opened it carefully. The total balance, 0. Withdrawals over 3 days. Every penny gone. For the first time, Clara's expression shifted from shock to understanding. "He cleaned you out too." "Everything," Isabella said quietly. The silence that followed wasn't grief anymore. It was something sharper, unified. The kind that doesn't break people apart. It binds them. They sat across from each other, the wife and the lover. Two versions of the same betrayal. Clara reached for her phone, scrolling through old messages, voice shaking. "He said he needed his passport for the flight." She stood, rummaged through a drawer, and pulled out a leather bag, the one he used when he stayed over. Empty. "His passport's gone," she said. "So are his cards." Isabella didn't move. She stared out the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Her reflection stared back, calm, collected, dangerous in her quiet. In that reflection, she saw it clearly. The truth wasn't about who he left. It was about what he was running from. And whatever it was, he'd made one mistake. He left 2 women who no longer believed in waiting. This wasn't the end of a marriage anymore. It was the beginning of a hunt. Isabella didn't sleep after leaving Clara's house. There was nothing left to dream about, and too much left to find. She went home to the mess he'd made, the empty drawers, the quiet rooms, the half-burned candles from a night that never ended. By morning, she was no longer the woman who waited for her husband. She was the one looking for him. She started small. The last credit card charge, a gas station off the highway, time-stamped hours after he was supposed to be home. She drove there herself, the sun barely up, the world still gray. The clerk remembered him, polite, calm, wearing the same jacket she'd ironed the week before. He'd paid in cash, asked for directions to the interstate bus terminal. The clerk shrugged when she asked if he'd seemed nervous. "No, ma'am. Just quiet." like someone already knew where he was going. At the terminal, Isabella found the proof. Security footage, time-stamped 11:42 p.m. Her husband, Tyler Green, walking briskly through the crowd, a single duffel slung over his shoulder. He didn't look back once. She watched him buy a ticket. Gate 4. Outbound bus to New Mexico. The woman at the counter handed him change. He smiled. That same controlled, practiced smile she'd once mistaken for love. The camera followed him as he disappeared into the crowd. Just another face in motion. And with that, he was gone. When love ends quietly, it feels like death. But when it ends by deception, it burns. The footage didn't just confirm her worst fear, it rewrote her entire marriage. She spent the next week digging through everything he'd ever touched. Every account, every paper trail, every lie. There were bank statements she'd never seen, transfers to names that didn't exist, receipts from cities he claimed he'd never been to. The man she thought she'd married didn't just leave her. He'd been leaving for years. Piece by piece, transaction by transaction. The fake business trips? A cover. The company he claimed to work for? Non-existent. The license he'd shown when they bought their house? Issued under a name that belonged to someone who'd died 10 years earlier. Each discovery stripped away another layer of the life she thought she knew. Every truth she'd built her years on had turned out to be scaffolding around a hollow shell. By the time Detective Harris called again, she already knew what he was going to say. He met her in the same small office where she'd first filed the missing person report. This time, there was no coffee, no sympathy, just facts. "Mrs. Green," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "If that's even the right name." She opened it. Copies of records, marriage license, birth certificate, employment files, all doctored, every single one. "Your husband's identity," Harris continued, "was created about 8 years ago, just before your wedding. We still don't know his real name." The room seemed to tilt slightly, but Isabella didn't flinch. She traced the forged signature on the paper with one finger, memorizing the curves and edges. "How far does it go?" she asked quietly. "Farther than we thought," he said. "Multiple accounts under aliases, international transfers. He was planning this long before he disappeared." She closed the folder slowly. "Then he's not missing," she said. "He's escaping." Harris looked at her carefully. "And if he's running, Mrs. Green, who's he running from?" She didn't answer. Not then, but she already knew. The camera lingers on her face, calm, controlled, unshaken. On the desk before her, the forged documents. On the screen beside her, the image of him stepping onto that bus. Each revelation clicks like gears turning, account numbers flashing, old messages reappearing, the sound of overlapping phone calls, fragments of his voice cutting through the static. "Trust me. I'll fix this. Just one more trip." She wasn't chasing answers anymore. She was following a trail, one he'd built too perfectly to hide from someone who now had not. Thanks for watching Revenge Tales HQ. Every story holds a lesson, and every ending, a new beginning. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.